The morning started like any other for the two sisters. They were excited because today was the day they would finally take a trip they had been planning for months. Both of them had been busy with school, work, and everyday responsibilities, so the thought of flying somewhere new and experiencing a little adventure made them feel free and happy. They had packed their bags carefully, making sure they had everything they needed for the journey ahead. Their outfits were chosen with care, comfortable yet stylish, perfect for a long flight. Each sister had a small handbag with her essentials and a backpack that contained snacks, books, and some personal items to keep themselves entertained. As they walked to the airport, they chatted and laughed, sharing stories and making small jokes about what they might experience on the flight. The excitement in their voices and the sparkle in their eyes showed that this was more than just a trip, it was a little adventure together, a memory in the making. Once they arrived at the airport, the sisters quickly went through the check-in process. They handed over their identification, got their boarding passes, and made their way towards security. The airport was busy, filled with the usual sounds of rolling luggage, announcements over loudspeakers, and people talking in hurried voices. Some travelers were rushing to catch their flights, while others moved leisurely, enjoying the anticipation of travel. The sisters navigated through the crowd easily, keeping close to each other as they waited in line for security checks. They smiled at strangers politely, exchanged small talk, and offered friendly words to the people around them. There was a sense of calm mixed with excitement. It was the feeling of being about to step into something new and unfamiliar, yet thrilling. Passing through security went smoothly. The sisters followed all the rules carefully, removing their shoes, placing their bags on the conveyor belt, and making sure nothing would set off the alarms. They were patient, waiting their turn, joking lightly about the slow process and sharing moments of laughter as they joked about how serious the security officers looked. Once everything was done, they collected their belongings, adjusted their bags, and walked toward the boarding area. The sisters had plenty of time before the flight, so they decided to sit down near the gate. They looked out the large windows at the airplanes lined up on the tarmac, imagining the places each flight would take its passengers. They sipped coffee from a nearby cafe, talked about the plans for their trip, and imagined all the fun experiences they would have. It was a quiet, happy moment shared between them, a pause before the excitement of flying began. Soon, the boarding process started. The sisters joined the line and waited patiently, watching as passengers in front of them moved slowly toward the plane. They noticed the flight attendants greeting each passenger with a smile and helping people find their seats. When it was finally their turn, they handed over their boarding passes with polite smiles. The flight attendants checked the passes, smiled, and directed them to their seats. To their surprise, they were assigned seats in first class, even though they had purchased regular tickets. At first, they were a little confused but quickly felt a surge of excitement. First class was different from the rest of the plane. The seats were larger, more comfortable, and spaced farther apart. There were screens in front of each seat, and the legroom allowed them to stretch and relax. The sisters exchanged glances, each silently thinking the same thing: this is amazing. They carefully placed their bags in the overhead compartment and settled into their seats, feeling a sense of luxury they had not expected. For a few minutes, everything seemed perfect. They adjusted their seats, looked at the entertainment options available, and talked quietly about how nice it was to have this unexpected upgrade. They smiled at each other, taking in the surroundings, and feeling proud of the little adventure that had begun so smoothly. But soon, the sense of excitement began to shift. A flight attendant approached them, a polite but firm expression on her face. She asked them to step aside, explaining that there was an issue with their seating. The sisters listened carefully, trying to understand what the problem was. They asked questions politely, hoping for a clear explanation. The flight attendant mentioned something about seating arrangements, but the details were vague and confusing. The sisters exchanged uneasy glances, feeling a sudden weight of worry. They had no idea why this was happening. They tried to remain calm, thinking perhaps it was a mistake or a simple misunderstanding that could be easily resolved. Despite their polite questions and attempts to clarify, the flight attendant insisted that they move to the back of the plane. The sisters were shocked and embarrassed. They had been enjoying the first-class seats, and now they were being asked to leave without a clear reason. As they gathered their belongings and moved toward the back, they could feel the eyes of other passengers on them. Some looked curious, others seemed indifferent, but the sisters felt the intense awareness of being noticed in a situation that made them uncomfortable. Their hearts beat a little faster, and a mix of confusion, frustration, and sadness filled their minds. They whispered to each other, trying to stay composed and remind themselves that this was something they could handle together. Despite the humiliation, they walked calmly, keeping their heads high, refusing to let fear or anger control their reactions. Once seated in the back, the sisters tried to collect themselves. They adjusted their seats and looked around, trying to focus on something positive despite the awkward situation. They felt a sense of injustice, wondering why they had been treated differently, but they also knew that panicking or reacting angrily would not help. Instead, they took a few deep breaths and began to think about what they could do next. The younger sister quietly took out her phone and dialed their father's number. He was a successful CEO, someone who always taught them the importance of staying calm under pressure and handling situations with intelligence and grace. As soon as he answered, she calmly explained everything that had happened: the excitement of boarding first class, the sudden request to move to the back, and the lack of explanation from the flight attendants. She spoke clearly and respectfully, focusing on the facts while expressing her feelings of discomfort and unfair treatment. Their father listened carefully, his tone calm but serious. He asked questions to make sure he understood exactly what had happened. The sisters answered patiently, describing the expressions on the flight attendants' faces, the vague explanations, and the feeling of being singled out for reasons they could not comprehend. They spoke about the stares from other passengers, the embarrassment they felt, and their frustration at not being treated fairly. Throughout the conversation, they remained composed, showing the wisdom their father had instilled in them over the years. The father promised he would handle the situation immediately and instructed the sisters to stay calm, continue to be polite, and document everything that was happening. His presence over the phone gave them a sense of reassurance, as though they were no longer facing the problem alone. As the flight continued, the sisters stayed alert and observant. They watched how the flight attendants moved down the aisle, assisting other passengers and carrying out their duties. They noticed small things: the polite smiles for some passengers, the hurried gestures for others, and the contrast only made them more aware of their own experience. They talked quietly among themselves, speculating about what might happen next and how their father might help. Despite the initial shock and embarrassment, they were determined not to let the situation ruin their trip. They reminded each other that they were capable, intelligent, and strong, and that this moment, though difficult, was temporary. They focused on staying composed and thinking ahead, preparing for the next steps in dealing with the unexpected challenge. During this time, the sisters also reflected on the larger reality of what had just occurred. They realized that incidents like this were not just personal but part of a broader experience that many people faced. It made them more aware of the importance of standing up for themselves and ensuring that others were treated fairly. Even in their discomfort, they recognized the chance to turn this incident into a lesson about courage, resilience, and dignity. They shared quiet words of encouragement with each other, holding hands briefly as a small gesture of support, and promised that they would not let this moment define them. They were determined to handle the situation with grace, knowing that their actions could make a difference not only for themselves but potentially for others in similar situations. As the plane continued on its journey, the sisters stayed alert, observing, thinking, and preparing. The excitement of the trip they had been looking forward to mingled with a sense of responsibility and awareness. They knew that the next moments could change the course of their experience and that staying composed and thoughtful was essential. In those quiet minutes, between looking out the window at the clouds and holding onto their father's advice over the phone, the sisters found a sense of inner strength. They were ready to face whatever came next, not just as travelers, but as confident young women standing up for themselves and for what was right. Once the sisters were settled at the back of the plane, a heavy silence filled the space between them. They could still feel the sting of embarrassment from being removed from the first-class seats. It was a strange mix of emotions: anger, confusion, disappointment, and a desire for fairness. They glanced at each other, sharing a look that said without words, "This shouldn't have happened." Despite the feelings swirling inside them, they understood that reacting impulsively could make things worse. They had been raised to stay composed and think clearly, even in difficult situations, and this was a moment to put that lesson into practice. The younger sister, who always had a calm and logical approach, decided to take the first step in addressing the issue. She quietly took out her phone and began documenting what had occurred. She opened a note and started typing down the exact sequence of events from the moment they boarded the plane, their surprise at the first-class seats, to the sudden request from the flight attendants to move to the back. She also included the vague explanations and dismissive gestures from the staff. Every detail, no matter how small, was important. She knew that having a clear, factual record could make a difference if they needed to explain the situation later. Meanwhile, the older sister stayed observant, carefully watching the behavior of the flight attendants and other passengers. She noticed how certain passengers were treated with smiles and polite gestures while they had been asked to move without a clear reason. Her mind was racing, trying to understand why this had happened, but she knew that getting frustrated in public wouldn't help. Instead, she focused on keeping herself calm and planning the next steps. She whispered to her sister, suggesting that they speak to their father. They both knew he could handle the situation in a way that would demand respect and attention, without creating unnecessary conflict. The younger sister dialed their father's number. When he answered, there was a brief moment of relief in their voices. Hearing a familiar, calm, and authoritative tone gave them a sense of security amidst the confusion. They explained the situation in detail, speaking slowly and clearly. They described how they had been assigned first-class seats by mistake or by some administrative decision, how they were suddenly told to move, and how no clear reason was given for this action. They also shared their feelings of discomfort and humiliation, emphasizing that the situation seemed unfair. Their father listened attentively, asking questions to clarify the events, making sure he had a complete understanding of what had happened. While speaking with their father, the sisters remained composed. They followed his advice to stay calm and polite, even as their frustration simmered. Their father reassured them that he would take care of the situation and instructed them to document everything that was happening in real time. He emphasized the importance of focusing on facts rather than emotions, knowing that a clear, rational approach would be far more effective in addressing the issue. The sisters felt a growing sense of confidence, realizing that they were not alone in facing this challenge. Their father's guidance provided a calm anchor in the middle of an uncomfortable and confusing situation. During the call, the sisters also discussed how to interact with the flight attendants. Their father reminded them to be courteous and respectful, even if the staff was not treating them the same way. He explained that maintaining composure was not a sign of weakness but a powerful way to assert themselves without escalating the situation. The sisters agreed, nodding silently to each other. They understood that this approach would not only help them personally but could also set an example for others who might face similar challenges in the future. As the conversation with their father continued, the sisters took note of every interaction with the airline staff. They observed small details: the tone of voice used by the attendants, the body language, and the way other passengers responded. They noticed that some passengers were curious, glancing over at them with interest, while others seemed absorbed in their own worlds. The sisters remained polite, smiling when appropriate, and avoiding confrontational behavior. They knew that their composure was a form of strength, a way to assert dignity in a situation that had taken it away from them temporarily. At the same time, the sisters began to think strategically about what could be done next. They considered speaking to the pilot, asking for clarification from a higher authority, or even reaching out to the airline's customer service team. Their father guided them through these options, helping them weigh the potential outcomes of each choice. He emphasized that the goal was not to create conflict but to ensure that justice and fairness were upheld. The sisters felt empowered by this guidance, realizing that they had the right to stand up for themselves, even in a challenging environment like an airplane mid-flight. Throughout the flight, the sisters continued to talk quietly among themselves. They shared thoughts, feelings, and strategies, supporting each other as they navigated the situation. The older sister reminded the younger one to stay calm and patient, while the younger sister encouraged her sibling to focus on solutions rather than dwelling on frustration. Their teamwork was seamless, a reflection of their close bond and shared values. Even in the face of discomfort, they found strength in each other, a reminder that they were not alone. As the flight progressed, the sisters also began to consider the larger implications of the situation. They realized that incidents like this were not just isolated moments of discomfort but part of broader patterns that affected many people. They thought about how the airline staff's behavior, intentional or not, could reflect systemic issues that needed to be addressed. This awareness gave them a sense of purpose, transforming their personal challenge into an opportunity to highlight fairness and equity. They discussed how they might share their experience later, not to shame anyone but to create awareness and encourage positive change. Meanwhile, the sister's father had taken action on his end. He contacted the airline's headquarters, explaining the situation calmly but firmly. He described his daughter's experience, emphasizing the lack of clear communication and the discomfort it had caused. He requested an immediate review and resolution, making it clear that the matter was serious and required prompt attention. The airline initially responded with polite but cautious language, attempting to downplay the severity of the incident. However, their father's calm authority and insistence on a thorough investigation ensured that the issue would not be ignored. As the sisters continued their flight, they received updates from their father. He reassured them that the airline was aware of the situation and that steps were being taken to address it. Knowing that someone was advocating for them gave the sisters a renewed sense of confidence. They felt seen and supported, a sharp contrast to the initial moments of confusion and embarrassment. This support allowed them to focus on maintaining their composure, observing the environment around them, and preparing for the next steps once the plane landed. Despite the initial shock and discomfort, the sisters remained engaged and thoughtful throughout the journey. They used the time to reflect on their values, the importance of staying composed under pressure, and the power of clear communication. They recognized that their response to the situation could set a precedent not only for themselves but also for others who might face similar challenges in the future. They quietly vowed to handle the situation with dignity, using their voices and actions to advocate for fairness while remaining respectful and polite. The sisters also spent time considering their emotional well-being. They acknowledged their feelings of hurt and frustration but refused to let these emotions control their behavior. They talked about the importance of self-care, reminding each other to breathe deeply, stay positive, and focus on constructive actions. This mindful approach allowed them to navigate the discomfort without allowing it to dominate their thoughts or interactions. They shared moments of lightness as well, quietly joking about minor things to keep their spirits up, demonstrating resilience even in a difficult situation. As the flight neared its destination, the sisters prepared themselves for the next steps. They reviewed what had happened, made mental notes of the details they might need to share, and discussed how they would approach the situation upon landing. Their father's guidance remained in their minds, reminding them to stay calm, factual, and composed. They felt a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that they were not passive victims of circumstance but active participants in ensuring fairness and justice. By the time the plane began its descent, the sisters had transformed their initial shock and discomfort into thoughtful planning and quiet confidence. They were ready to face whatever came next, prepared with facts, a clear plan, and the support of someone who understood the situation fully. They had turned a difficult experience into an opportunity to demonstrate strength, composure, and resilience. Even in the back of the plane, away from the first-class seats they had been removed from, the sisters felt a sense of control over their own actions and a belief that fairness could still prevail. In those final moments before landing, the sisters looked at each other and nodded, a silent agreement that they would handle the situation with dignity and clarity. They had documented the events, communicated effectively with their father, and maintained composure throughout the ordeal. They knew that the next phase would be challenging but felt confident in their ability to navigate it successfully. The flight, which had begun with excitement, had turned into a lesson in patience, resilience, and the importance of standing up for oneself calmly and wisely. When the plane finally touched down, the sisters could feel the tension slowly leaving their shoulders, but they knew the situation was far from over. Their father had instructed them to remain calm and wait until the right moment to address the matter fully. As the aircraft slowed to a complete stop, passengers began gathering their belongings, chatting quietly, and preparing to disembark. The sisters stayed seated, their eyes observing every movement around them. The airline staff seemed busy directing passengers, checking boarding passes, and maintaining order. Amid the general activity, the sisters quietly reviewed the notes they had made during the flight, ensuring they remembered every small detail that might be important when they spoke with the airline representatives. Their father had assured them over the phone that he was already in contact with the airline's corporate office. The sisters knew that having someone in authority supporting them would make a difference, but they also understood that they needed to remain composed and polite when addressing the staff on the ground. The older sister whispered to the younger one, reminding her to keep calm and not let emotions take over. They both took a deep breath and prepared themselves to act thoughtfully. Their father had emphasized the importance of remaining respectful while being firm, a combination that often had the strongest impact. As passengers began leaving the plane, a senior flight attendant approached the sisters. Her expression was polite, but there was an undertone of caution in her voice. "Excuse me," she said softly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" The sisters nodded, standing up and following her to a quieter area near the front of the aircraft. The attendant explained that the airline had received communication from corporate regarding their situation and that they wanted to understand exactly what had happened. This was the first sign that their voice was being heard, and the sisters felt a sense of cautious optimism. They knew that being clear, precise, and factual was essential at this point. The sisters began recounting the events as they had documented them. They explained how they had been assigned first-class seats, how they had been asked to move without a clear reason, and how the situation had left them feeling confused and humiliated. They spoke calmly, without raising their voices or showing anger, carefully sticking to the facts. The senior flight attendant listened attentively, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding the sisters' perspective, and this gave them hope that the airline would take the matter seriously. While they spoke with the flight attendant, a manager from the airline approached. He introduced himself and said that he had been briefed about the situation by corporate. His tone was professional, but firm, conveying that the airline was treating the matter seriously. He asked the sisters to explain the events again, and they repeated their account, emphasizing the sequence of events, the lack of explanation for their removal, and the emotional impact it had on them. The manager listened carefully, nodding and taking notes. He assured them that the airline was committed to investigating the incident thoroughly and would respond appropriately. At this point, the sisters' father arrived at the airport. Seeing him brought an immediate sense of relief. His presence alone seemed to command respect from the airline staff. He greeted his daughters warmly, then spoke with the airline representatives in a calm but authoritative voice. He outlined the situation as his daughters had described it, emphasizing that this was not just about seats but about dignity, fairness, and respect. The staff listened attentively, clearly aware that they were now dealing with someone who expected a serious resolution. The father asked the airline to explain why his daughters had been asked to leave the first-class seats. The manager explained that there had been a miscommunication between the booking system and the flight crew. Although the seats had been available and were initially assigned to the sisters, the crew had mistakenly believed that they were occupied by other passengers who had higher priority or special requirements. The explanation was polite but did not diminish the sisters' feelings of embarrassment. The father acknowledged the explanation but also emphasized that the manner in which the staff handled the situation had caused unnecessary distress. The sisters spoke up, calmly expressing how the sudden removal had made them feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. They emphasized that while they understood mistakes could happen, the way they were treated lacked respect and professionalism. The airline representatives listened, taking in every word, and the father reinforced their points with clarity and authority. The conversation was measured and respectful, yet firm, ensuring that the airline could not dismiss their concerns. Meanwhile, passengers who had witnessed parts of the incident began to take notice. Some approached quietly, expressing support and curiosity about what had happened. A few asked the sisters if they were okay, showing empathy and concern. This small wave of encouragement helped the sisters feel less isolated. They realized that their experience had resonated with others and that standing up for themselves was not only about their dignity but also about advocating for fairness in a broader sense. The airline manager offered several solutions. First, he suggested a formal apology to the sisters for the misunderstanding and for the way the situation had been handled. He also offered compensation in the form of travel vouchers and priority seating for future flights. The father, speaking on behalf of his daughters, asked that the apology be documented and that the airline implement additional training for staff to ensure that such misunderstandings would not happen again. He stressed that this was not merely about compensation but about improving the airline's approach to customer service and fairness. Throughout this process, the sisters remained composed and engaged. They asked thoughtful questions about the airline's policies, seeking to understand how such errors occurred and what steps were being taken to prevent them in the future. Their curiosity and willingness to engage constructively impressed the airline staff, who began to treat the situation with even greater seriousness. The father supported them quietly, allowing his daughters to speak for themselves while offering guidance when necessary. This balance of independence and support empowered the sisters and made it clear that they were capable, articulate, and deserving of respect. After a thorough discussion, the airline representatives agreed to document the incident formally and submit it to corporate for review. They also assured the sisters and their father that appropriate actions would be taken to prevent similar situations. The manager apologized again for the discomfort caused and thanked the sisters for their patience, composure, and clear communication. This acknowledgement felt meaningful, signaling that their voices had been heard and their concerns taken seriously. The sisters' father then spoke privately with the airline manager, emphasizing the importance of long-term solutions rather than temporary fixes. He encouraged the airline to implement training focused on empathy, clear communication, and cultural awareness. He also suggested that they review their seating assignment processes to minimize misunderstandings in the future. The manager took notes carefully and promised to escalate the suggestions to corporate leadership. This step ensured that the sisters' experience could contribute to positive changes that would benefit future passengers. While all of this was happening, the sisters reflected on the experience. They realized that a moment that had started with embarrassment and discomfort had turned into an opportunity for growth, learning, and advocacy. They understood the power of calm, clear communication and the importance of standing up for oneself without aggression. They also recognized the value of having supportive allies, like their father, who could guide and amplify their voices when needed. The experience taught them lessons about resilience, patience, and strategic thinking that they would carry throughout their lives. Finally, the sisters and their father thanked the airline staff for listening and taking the matter seriously. The staff expressed gratitude for the sisters' patience and for the father's constructive approach. The sisters felt a sense of closure, knowing that their concerns had been addressed respectfully and that their actions had contributed to a potential improvement in the airline's policies. As they left the airport, they reflected on how their composure, documentation, and clear communication had turned a difficult situation into a meaningful resolution. On the way home, the sisters discussed the events in detail. They talked about what they had learned about advocacy, fairness, and personal dignity. They also shared thoughts about how they could use this experience to help others, perhaps by speaking about it publicly or supporting initiatives focused on respectful treatment in public spaces. The journey, which had begun with confusion and discomfort, had transformed into a powerful lesson in self-respect, perseverance, and the importance of standing up calmly and confidently when faced with injustice. The sisters realized that the flight incident was more than just a misunderstanding about seats, it was a reflection of the importance of voice, agency, and courage. They had faced a situation that could have left them feeling powerless but instead had navigated it with intelligence, patience, and dignity. They had turned a personal challenge into an opportunity for advocacy, change, and empowerment. The lessons they learned that day would remain with them, shaping how they approached challenges and treated others in their own lives. By the end of the day, the sisters felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had maintained their composure, effectively communicated their concerns, and contributed to a meaningful resolution. The experience strengthened their bond with each other and with their father, who had guided them thoughtfully and strategically. Most importantly, they realized that fairness, respect, and dignity were not just abstract values but principles worth defending, even in difficult and uncomfortable situations. As they finally settled back into their routine at home, the sisters reflected on the events with a mix of relief and pride. They understood that the journey had tested their patience and resolve but had also revealed their capacity for courage, clarity, and grace under pressure. They knew that the story of their experience would remain a powerful reminder of how dignity and fairness can be upheld through calm, thoughtful action, and how personal strength can turn even the most challenging situations into meaningful lessons. After the airport incident, the sisters returned home with their father. The car ride was quiet at first, but soon, they began discussing everything that had happened. Each moment, each detail, seemed more significant now that it was behind them. They realized that the experience had been overwhelming, yet it had also taught them the importance of standing up for oneself while remaining calm. Their father listened carefully as they recounted the events in order, adding small reflections of his own. He praised their composure and reminded them that their ability to stay calm had played a major role in the positive outcome. Once home, the sisters were greeted warmly by their extended family. News of the incident had already begun circulating through calls and messages. Their relatives expressed concern, but more than that, they expressed admiration for the sisters' courage. The sisters felt a mixture of relief and pride. They had endured a situation that could have been humiliating, yet they had navigated it gracefully. Their father encouraged them to share their experience in ways that could inspire others while still protecting their privacy and dignity. He explained that their story was a valuable lesson about fairness, self-respect, and advocacy. In the days following the incident, the airline reached out formally. A senior executive called to apologize personally for the events of the flight and to acknowledge the sisters' experience. The call was polite, professional, and empathetic. The executive explained that an internal investigation was underway and assured the sisters and their father that measures would be taken to prevent such situations from happening again. They offered formal apologies and additional compensation, emphasizing that the airline took the matter seriously. The sisters felt a sense of validation, understanding that their calm and clear communication had led to meaningful acknowledgement. The sisters also took time to reflect privately on the emotional impact of the incident. They recognized that they had experienced confusion, frustration, and embarrassment, but they had also discovered their own resilience. They realized that difficult situations often reveal inner strengths that may not be apparent in everyday life. By handling the situation thoughtfully, They had not only protected their dignity but had also influenced a large organization to address its shortcomings. The experience became a point of personal growth, helping them understand that respect and fairness are not only principles to advocate for but also qualities to embody consistently. Meanwhile, the story of the flight began to spread on social media. People who had witnessed or heard about the incident shared the story, emphasizing the sisters' poise and their father's guidance. Many expressed admiration for how the sisters had handled themselves, highlighting their calm demeanor and clear communication. The sisters were surprised by the attention but also proud that their experience could serve as a lesson for others. They discussed how they might use the situation as an opportunity to raise awareness about respectful treatment in public spaces, especially in situations where misunderstandings could occur. One morning, the sisters received an invitation from a local media outlet to share their story in a careful and respectful interview. They were initially hesitant, wanting to ensure that the focus remained on the lessons learned rather than the drama of the event. After discussing it with their father, they agreed, understanding that this could help promote awareness about the importance of empathy, fairness, and proper customer service. The interview was conducted thoughtfully, with emphasis on the sisters' experience, the lessons they learned, and the steps taken by the airline to address the situation. They shared their reflections on courage, dignity, and the power of calm communication, leaving viewers inspired and reflective. As the interview aired, the sisters received messages from people of all ages and backgrounds. Many shared similar experiences where they had felt unfairly treated or disrespected, and they expressed gratitude for the sisters' example. Some noted that witnessing the sisters' composure had inspired them to approach conflicts with more patience and clarity. Others mentioned that the father's role in guiding the sisters reminded them of the importance of supportive allies in difficult situations. The sisters were humbled by the responses, realizing that their story had resonated far beyond the flight itself. Back at home, life gradually returned to normal, but the sisters remained mindful of the lessons learned. They took time each day to reflect on their experience, discussing what they had done well and what they might do differently if faced with a similar situation. They practiced mindfulness and patience, understanding that calm reflection allowed them to make thoughtful decisions rather than reacting impulsively. Their father encouraged them to continue building their communication skills, emphasizing that the ability to express oneself clearly and respectfully was one of the most powerful tools a person could have. In school and social settings, the sisters noticed subtle changes in how they interacted with others. They felt more confident expressing their thoughts, asking questions, and standing up for themselves when necessary. Their peers also noticed the change, often complimenting the sisters on their maturity and composure. Teachers and mentors encouraged them, recognizing that the incident had strengthened their character and provided valuable life experience. The sisters felt proud, not because of the attention, but because they understood the importance of learning from challenges and using them as opportunities for personal growth. Over the following weeks, the airline implemented several changes based on the sisters' feedback. Staff training programs were updated to emphasize empathy, clear communication, and careful handling of passenger concerns. Policies for seating assignments were reviewed to prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. The sisters received formal letters from the airline acknowledging their contributions to these improvements and thanking them for their patience and clarity. These gestures reinforced the sisters' understanding that advocacy and calm communication could create meaningful change, even within large organizations. The sisters' father encouraged them to document their experience in writing. He suggested that putting their story on paper could serve as both a personal reflection and a resource for others. They wrote carefully, describing each moment, their emotions, and the strategies they had used to remain calm and effective. They included lessons about patience, clear communication, self-respect, and resilience. As they wrote, they realized how much they had grown in a short time and how their experience could inspire others to navigate challenges with dignity and strength. In addition to writing, the sisters began exploring ways to support other young people facing similar situations. They joined online forums, participated in discussions about respectful treatment in public spaces, and even contributed to local initiatives promoting awareness about fairness and empathy. They realized that their story was not just about themselves, it had the potential to empower others to speak up for their rights, advocate for fairness, and navigate difficult situations with calm and confidence. The experience became a catalyst for community engagement and personal development, reinforcing the sisters' sense of purpose. The sisters also focused on building emotional resilience. They attended workshops on communication, conflict resolution, and leadership, understanding that these skills would help them navigate future challenges effectively. They practiced role-playing scenarios, learning how to maintain composure in stressful situations and how to advocate for themselves and others respectfully. Their father supported these efforts, sharing his own experiences and offering guidance. Together, they created a structured approach to personal growth, turning a difficult experience into an opportunity for learning, development, and empowerment. As months passed, the sisters reflected on the incident with a sense of gratitude. While the situation had initially been stressful and confusing, it had ultimately taught them invaluable lessons. They had learned the importance of patience, clear communication, self-respect, and advocacy. They had discovered the impact of having supportive allies and the power of calm, thoughtful action. Most importantly, they realized that challenges, when approached with composure and purpose, could become opportunities for growth, empowerment, and positive change. The sisters' experience also strengthened their relationship with each other. They shared a deeper understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. They learned to support one another in moments of stress, offering guidance, reassurance, and encouragement. Their bond became stronger, built on trust, empathy, and shared experience. This newfound closeness allowed them to approach future challenges together, confident in their ability to navigate difficulties with dignity and resilience. In school, community activities, and social interactions, the sisters became advocates for fairness and respectful treatment. They spoke with peers, teachers, and community members about the importance of clear communication, empathy, and standing up for oneself respectfully. Their story inspired others to reflect on their own behavior and to approach conflicts with patience, understanding, and composure. The sisters realized that their experience, once a private challenge, had transformed into a public lesson in dignity, respect, and resilience. The sisters' father continued to guide them thoughtfully, ensuring that they remained grounded and focused. He reminded them that the lessons learned from the incident were lifelong tools that could be applied in countless situations. He encouraged them to embrace challenges as opportunities for growth, to communicate clearly, and to act with dignity and integrity at all times. His guidance reinforced the sisters' understanding that true strength lay not in confrontation but in calm, purposeful action. As the year progressed, the sisters reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple flight. What had initially seemed like an uncomfortable and humiliating experience had evolved into a profound lesson in resilience, advocacy, and personal growth. They had discovered their capacity for composure, clear communication, and thoughtful action. They had learned how to turn challenges into opportunities, how to stand up for themselves respectfully, and how to inspire positive change in others. By the time the next holiday season arrived, the sisters and their father looked back with pride and satisfaction. They had faced a difficult situation, handled it with grace, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. They had learned lessons that would stay with them for a lifetime: the value of patience, the power of clear communication, the importance of self-respect, and the impact of standing up for fairness. Their journey had transformed a challenging moment into a meaningful story of growth, empowerment, and inspiration that would continue to guide them in every step of their lives. With time, the sisters realized that their experience on the flight had become more than just a personal story, it was now a lesson that could help others. They began sharing it thoughtfully in their community, schools, and among friends, always focusing on the positive lessons they had learned rather than the discomfort they had endured. They emphasized patience, clear communication, and standing up for oneself respectfully. Their story inspired conversations about empathy, fairness, and understanding, making people reflect on their own behavior in daily interactions. The sisters also noticed how their own confidence had grown since the incident. Situations that might have seemed intimidating before now felt manageable. They understood that challenges are a natural part of life, and how one responds to them defines not only the outcome but also personal growth. They practiced facing small challenges every day, speaking up in class, asking for help when needed, or resolving disagreements calmly with friends. Each small experience reinforced the lessons they had learned and strengthened their belief in themselves. Their father continued to play a guiding role, offering advice and sharing stories from his own life about facing challenges with integrity. He reminded them that life would always present obstacles, but each obstacle was also an opportunity to learn, grow, and make a difference. The sisters took this guidance to heart, knowing that true strength was not about avoiding difficulties but about approaching them thoughtfully and with composure. At school, the sisters became role models for their peers. Teachers noticed their maturity, patience, and ability to handle conflicts calmly. Other students admired how they expressed themselves clearly without aggression or fear. Occasionally, students approached them to share personal experiences, seeking advice on how to handle difficult situations with dignity. The sisters responded with empathy, sharing their story and the strategies they had used to remain calm and effective. This gave them a sense of purpose, showing that their experience could positively impact others. As the sisters shared their story, they also emphasized the importance of understanding different perspectives. They explained that misunderstandings often happen because people see situations from different angles. By communicating clearly, asking questions politely, and listening carefully, conflicts could often be prevented or resolved peacefully. Their insights encouraged others to think about fairness, empathy, and patience, helping build a community where respect and understanding were valued. In addition to their local community, the sisters' story reached wider audiences. Through carefully written articles and school presentations, they shared how a challenging experience could become a source of growth. People responded with admiration and appreciation. Some mentioned that the story had inspired them to approach their own problems with calmness and clear communication. Others noted that the sisters' example showed how courage is not always loud or confrontational. Sometimes, courage is quiet, thoughtful, and composed. The sisters also explored creative ways to document their experience. They created journals, illustrations, and even short videos to express what they had learned. Each creation reflected their feelings, thoughts, and reflections, serving both as a personal reminder and as a resource for others. They realized that storytelling could be a powerful tool for learning and inspiration. By sharing experiences carefully and respectfully, they could encourage empathy, understanding, and positive action among people of all ages. Over time, the airline incident became a turning point in their lives rather than a moment of fear or embarrassment. The sisters understood that the way they had handled themselves had opened doors to personal growth, community recognition, and new opportunities. They had learned about their own resilience, the importance of self-respect, and the power of clear communication. More than that, they had discovered the impact of using challenging experiences to teach and inspire others. The sisters' bond with their father also deepened. They realized that his support, guidance, and calm presence had been crucial in navigating the stressful situation. Through the experience, they understood the value of mentorship, family support, and encouragement. They began applying these lessons in their own relationships, supporting friends, siblings, and peers with patience, understanding, and care. The experience taught them that personal growth is not only about individual strength but also about fostering positive connections with others. As they grew older, the sisters began seeking new opportunities to advocate for fairness and empathy. They participated in workshops, attended community meetings, and volunteered for initiatives that promoted respectful communication and conflict resolution. They shared their story whenever appropriate, always emphasizing lessons about dignity, patience, and the importance of standing up for oneself without resorting to anger or fear. Their experience had transformed them into thoughtful, compassionate leaders who inspired others by example. Throughout this journey, the sisters never forgot the emotions they felt on that flight: confusion, anxiety, frustration, and even fear. But they also remembered the strength, courage, and composure they discovered within themselves. They understood that difficult moments often reveal qualities that might remain hidden in comfortable, everyday life. By reflecting on these experiences, they became more self-aware, more confident, and more capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The sisters also noticed a change in the way they approached relationships and social situations. They became more empathetic listeners, patient communicators, and understanding friends. They learned that by staying calm and thoughtful, they could influence others positively, help resolve conflicts, and encourage fairness in everyday interactions. They realized that the lessons learned on one challenging flight could extend to every aspect of life, from school and work to family and community. In addition, the sisters discovered that challenges often provide opportunities for leadership. By taking responsibility for their actions, communicating clearly, and acting with dignity, they naturally became role models in various settings. Teachers, mentors, and peers recognized their maturity and encouraged them to continue sharing their experiences and insights. The sisters understood that leadership is not always about authority or position; it is often about the ability to inspire, guide, and influence others through example. As the years went by, the sisters also explored the idea of helping others prevent or navigate similar experiences. They developed workshops and informal guidance sessions for young people, emphasizing communication skills, emotional resilience, and the importance of fairness and empathy. Their programs focused on practical strategies, such as speaking calmly, asking questions politely, and reflecting on different perspectives. Participants appreciated the sisters' practical advice, personal stories, and the positive energy they brought to these sessions. Through all of this, the sisters learned that challenges can be transformed into opportunities. What initially seemed like a moment of discomfort had become a foundation for personal growth, community engagement, and leadership. They had discovered that life's difficulties are not only obstacles but also chances to learn, develop, and make a difference in the lives of others. By approaching challenges with composure, thoughtfulness, and empathy, they had turned a stressful experience into a lifelong source of strength and inspiration. The sisters also reflected on the importance of forgiveness and understanding. While they had been treated unfairly on the flight, they chose not to dwell on resentment. Instead, they focused on lessons learned, personal growth, and the positive changes that resulted from the situation. This approach helped them maintain emotional balance and continue moving forward with confidence. They realized that holding on to anger or blame would not have served them, but learning from the experience and using it constructively empowered them and others around them. Their journey also taught them about the value of preparation and awareness. They became more attentive to details in everyday life, whether it was in travel, school, or social situations. They learned to anticipate challenges, communicate expectations clearly, and advocate for themselves and others with confidence. This proactive approach allowed them to navigate life with greater ease and reduce the chances of misunderstandings or unnecessary conflict. In the end, the sisters' story became a source of inspiration for everyone who heard it. It was a story about courage, resilience, empathy, and personal growth. It showed that even ordinary people can face extraordinary challenges and emerge stronger, wiser, and more confident. By sharing their experience respectfully and thoughtfully, the sisters encouraged others to reflect on their own behavior, communicate clearly, and approach challenges with dignity and calm. Looking back, the sisters realized that the incident on the flight was not just an event, it was a turning point. It had helped them discover their inner strength, develop critical life skills, and inspire others through example. They understood that challenges are inevitable, but how one responds defines the outcome and shapes personal growth. They had learned that patience, empathy, clear communication, and self-respect are not just principles to uphold, they are tools for navigating life effectively and meaningfully. Years later, the sisters continued to reflect on their journey with gratitude. They knew that the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever, guiding their decisions, actions, and interactions. They had discovered that true strength lies in composure, understanding, and thoughtful action. They had learned that one person's courage and dignity can influence others positively, creating ripples of change in unexpected ways. Their story, born from a single challenging flight, had become a lifelong guide, inspiring them and countless others to approach life with confidence, respect, and compassion. Through every new challenge, the sisters remembered that moment on the flight, the confusion, the frustration, and the eventual clarity. They knew that those emotions had taught them resilience, patience, and the importance of calm communication. They approached life's uncertainties with confidence, knowing that every difficulty carried a lesson, every challenge an opportunity, and every experience a chance to grow. The sisters had transformed a moment of discomfort into a foundation of wisdom, compassion, and empowerment, proving that even the hardest experiences can lead to the greatest personal victories.